Hello, my name's Howard, and I'm a baby boomer, born in 1955, no apologies. I became what I call music aware at a very early age. I'm not a journalist nor an expert on music. I also don't play an instrument, but I have a real love and appreciation for good music. My passion and knowledge is in the area of classic rock. So what I'd like to do with this and possibly future videos is to provide my perspective and anecdotal information on a specific classic rock album. From the cover to the liner notes to the songs and the artists themselves. If this is received well, I'll do more. But just a disclaimer up front, this will likely be amateurish and my visual aids will be very crude because I haven't done this before. Also overlook any glitches or awkward transitions. With that being said, I want to start with this album, Retrospective by Buffalo Springfield. This is a greatest hits album, and generally speaking, I dismiss greatest hits albums in any discussion about great albums because it just doesn't seem fair to compare them with albums of all new material. It's sort of like an all-star team facing a regular team. However, in the case of Buffalo Springfield, they only made 3 studio albums and only had one song that got a significant amount of airplay. So while it's technically greatest hits, in reality in the early 70s, it felt almost like all new material to me. I guess I should also take a step back and explain how I came upon this album in the first place. Remember, in that era, you couldn't just pull up a song from your favorite streaming service. Nor could you hear anything but the hits on AM radio. Yeah, FM radio had come into being, but you still couldn't hear anything you wanted to at any time. So in most cases, my criteria for purchasing albums was based on 1, a certain song I'd heard on the radio, which this album had. 2, from the album cover itself, which really didn't play a part in my selection, at least on this album. 3, whether it was a double album, which also this album was not. 4, whether it had a poster inside. Again, this album didn't have that. Or 5, from a friend's recommendation or the group's reputation, which both actually played a role in my selection of this album. With that in mind, there was a mail-order record club in existence in the 70s called Record Club of America. And unlike other popular record clubs of that time, this one had no requirements to purchase a certain number of records over a finite period of time, and their prices were reasonable. They also periodically ran promotions where you could earn free records for signing up friends. Well, my best friend and I teamed up and began recruiting friends to join. We even signed up our pets to get the biggest return. As a result, we were able to obtain many albums that we otherwise wouldn't have bought. That is, we took a chance on unknown commodities. One of those albums was, you guessed it, Retrospective. The only songs I had heard from Buffalo Springfield at that time was For What It's Worth, Kind Woman, and Sit Down, I Think I Love You. And to be truthful, I probably didn't even realize Buffalo Springfield was the artist. To sidetrack a bit more and explain what interested me in this band, from my criteria earlier, there was a kid in my elementary school who I'll categorize as James Dean mixed with the Fonz. He was rarely in class, and when he was quiet and unapproachable. He just had this aura that you didn't mess with him. He was, however, extremely smart, straight A's, and while we all feared him, we were intrigued by him. When I heard that Buffalo Springfield was one of his favorite bands, I thought there must be something there that I need to investigate. So Retrospective was one of the free albums I decided to take a shot on. That's a whole lot of background to get to the album itself, so let's go. The album was released by Atco, a subsidiary of Atlantic Records that began as an outlet for acts that didn't fit the mold for Atlantic. The front album cover is a painting of a peaceful stream in the woods, an out-of-scale butterfly, 2 partial female statues, and a small superimposed picture of the band in the background looking towards something to their left. Nothing particularly groundbreaking, but something whimsical. The back cover has a listing of songs and typical album acknowledgments at the top, along with a short statement about the album and band by Ahmet Ertegun. At the time, I had no idea who Ahmet Ertegun was, but I thought his name was an unusual one to be speaking about a rock group. He was also obviously very impressed with the band. I would learn more about Mr. Erdogan later, but I'll leave it at that for now. At the bottom of the back cover is another painting. This one depicts a rocky shoreline with a pencil sketch of the band inset. Beside the band is a photo of another person. I had no idea who it was or why he wasn't in the pencil sketch on the front cover. I would find out later that it was Jim Messina, who was their engineer/producer and didn't join the band as a musician till close to the end of their existence. So maybe they didn't have any band pictures with him included. Although I didn't know it then, but he would move on to great things with Poco, Loggins, and Messina, and as a solo artist and producer. One more thing on the back cover, look what's in the lower left corner, a Record Club of America label. Pretty cool. And finally, before we get to the songs, I told you already there was a person on this album that would later become extremely famous, but I wasn't aware of them when I bought the album, and that was Jim Messina. Also, though, I don't believe I was aware or familiar with Crosby, Stills, and Nash or Young. So the fact that the group included Stephen Stills and Neil Young didn't really mean anything to me at the time. Now let's get to the songs. Though there are songs on this album that I like more than others, there really isn't a bad track. And when a discussion of Desert Island albums comes up, this one's definitely on the list. All of the songs but one is written by Stills or Young, with the exception being Kind Woman by Richie Furay. The album opens with For What It's Worth, an obvious choice and arguably the only song that still gets a lot of airplay today. This is a Stephen Stills number inspired by a curfew protest on Sunset Boulevard where police clashed with the younger crowd to create quite a scene. Besides the haunting lyrics, one of the things that stands out in this arrangement is the repeating two-note guitar part with tremolo effect. I'm sure For What It's Worth would still have been a hit without that, but it certainly would not have been as iconic as it is. Song 2 is Mr. Soul, a song by Neil Young about his struggles with stardom. While not one of my favorites on the album, it sort of established the Neil Young fuzzy guitar sound that would become his signature, at least in my mind. The third song is another Stills number, which if I'm not mistaken may have been a minor hit for them or someone else. I seem to recall another version of the song that was a bit smoother and less choppy, but I've never been able to find it. At any rate, it's a sweet little love song. The next song is the Richie Furay penned Kind Woman. I'm guessing Furay must have felt a little like George Harrison in that there were two other extremely strong songwriters who didn't give him much of an opportunity to shine. But that would change later on in Poco and in his solo career. Another interesting tidbit about this song is the pedal steel guitar played by a then unknown Rusty Young. And speaking of Poco, this song brought together these major players in the formation of that group, Furay, Young, and Messina. Bluebird by Stills is next up and would really illustrate his ability to write songs with time changes and ordered sets of musical pieces. Think Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. Also, the banjo used here was atypical of most rock music at the time. James Gang does a cover of Bluebird on their first album. It's nowhere near as good as this one, but indicates that others were taking note of Stills' songwriting prowess. The last song on side one is On the Way Home by Young. There are probably 3 Young songs on this album that are among my favorites of his. This one, I Am a Child and Expecting to Fly. I love the short a cappella intro that leads into a catchy tune with strong vocals and a lush background orchestra. The first song on side 2 is another Young song. Nowadays Clancy can't even sing. It's the only song on the album where the songwriter isn't the lead singer. I've heard that the record company was a little apprehensive about Young's voice, so they gave lead vocals on this one to Richie Furay. It's a strong opener for the side, and I think they made the right decision by giving it to Furay. Song 2 is another Young number, Broken Arrow. Perhaps he was taking note of what Stills was doing with songs like Bluebird and what the Beatles were doing with sound effects and atypical rock instruments. The result is an interesting number that was rather long for the time, 6 minutes and 13 seconds. The third track is a Stills song, Rock and Roll Woman, who some say was inspired by Grace Slick. Nice harmonies and a catchy tune make this a would-be hit. I Am a Child, the next number, is, as I said earlier, one of my favorite songs on the album. It's written from a child's perspective, and Young really nails it. The line, "What is the color when black is burned?" gives me chills in its innocence and unfiltered curiosity. Next up is Go and Say Goodbye, another Stills number. In my mind, this was one of the first country rock tunes. Regardless of whether it was or wasn't, it's an upbeat country-tinged rocker that also could have been a hit. The album is rounded out with another Young selection, Expecting to Fly. This is a beautiful, melancholy number, complete with full orchestration and a tune that can haunt you in a good way. I read recently that the Hollies liked this song so much that it inspired them to answer with the song Wings. Well, as you can tell, I really love this album, and I'm glad I stumbled upon it in a serendipitous sort of way in elementary school. But at any rate, I enjoy doing this, and I hope you found some benefit or joy in watching it, and maybe I'll make another one. Thanks.